Dr. Lee.
Hi,
How are you doing?
good.
For the spiritual disciplines class,
Yes,
is that a matron and an online class, or the matron is an online class?
it is happening in May term. And I want it to be primarily for that. There are some situations where I might need to offer it. So,
Are you trying?
We got back like two.
there are some people that might need more than one class that's offered.
Wow.
So
you-
if
I
I'm
wasn't
enrolled
there.
in spiritual formation or spiritual discipline
Well, I
online,
also
is
just
that
had
the
a
J
good
term?
fire for like
What it
almost
says
2 years.
online?
No, that would be later on.
Yeah,
Okay,
I guess I don't, is it,
so there is a J term and a summer one?
So we were in the.
I probably won't do it this summer, but it may be pushed back
There's
into
one that
the
got 15
semester.
minutes early.
Oh, yeah.
Then-
I was in the first one. Do you know why the second got so late?
I had to make corrections.
Yeah. So.
Because you're doing your internship this summer.
I'm doing this.
Stop one time,
So you wanna do your internship
30 minutes down the road to get gas. And
Um,
we didn't stop.
like over January?
Usually.
Yeah, end of December into January is my senior year.
Okay, we can do that.
You're screaming at height.
It's, yeah, no, it's not bad.
We may be able to put it in here. One thing is that if we can arrange for you to get 6 hours in this period, if you get financial aid, you can get financial aid in the summer. That's not going to,
I
the
remember.
disciplines class may not help you with that. So have you done music appreciation yet?
Yeah,
I'm up there too. And there's a little.
if there's a Bible elective that I can do this summer, that's probably what I'm looking towards, because that's what I need, is I think 2 hours of a Bible elective or something.
Yeah.
Like pastoral epistles or something of mine.
Have you done that yet?
I haven't done that yet.
You'll,
Taylor, did you get enough
that would
sleep?
also be
No.
1 credit, so, okay, we'll come up with a plan.
Probably not.
Wow.
This one,
That's
if you stay for this is Bible, but it would also work as an
Oh,
elective.
they're all great.
So this one, that I'm in right now, this is the fall one, is that right? That's not the summer one?
This here would be a fall online class.
Okay,
And that is, that was offered in J term of this year,
okay. I'll probably end up doing that.
but it was
last
not,
one.
but we're not doing it this coming J term.
Oh, not this,
It already happened last J term.
Oh, I'm sorry, I mean May term, you're doing this one May term, right?
No,
Oh, you're not doing spiritual formation May term?
the one I'm doing in May is the practice of spiritual discipline.
That's right. That's what I'm doing. So that's probably the one that I would do instead of biblical hermeneutics.
Okay.
If I do that one. So I'd probably just do the May term
It's something I also.
disciplines and have that one towards my solid credits.
That sounds fine.
Then I can find another 2 hours to add. All right, thank you.
Okay,
Dr.
well, yeah,
No,
we'll
that's-
finish that
it
up.
usually helps. Can you fall asleep to it easily?
I don't know. Yes.
Could you? Like, could you? Yeah.
What?
I did that very
All right.
good. What did you do this weekend?
Were you rejoicing in the absence of most of the student body?
No, didn't really seem to take notice. I was at the birthday party for the Stevensons.
Man, I'm sad I missed it. I got an invite, actually, I missed it.
I'm sure going on the choir tour was,
It definitely left us with a lack of sleep, but it was great.
I went to yeah. Oh, yeah. And, he's got parties, so. I'm invited to his other kid's birthday party this Saturday.
Oh, is that the one that we sang to?
Yeah, Henry.
Their kids are so cute.
All of their kids.
I got to hold Lucy and that made my weekend.
Yeah, I think Caroline's a kid, so.
I really like Charlotte because she talked to me.
Charlotte's awesome.
She let me sit at the
Corner's
kids'
cool,
table.
too. Yeah, that's a good table. Dr. Reed, thanks for letting me be in this class. I'm just gonna have to leave. Have a fun time. Thanks.
okay. All right, so today we're going to begin with the PowerPoint. of the last one that we were dealing with, and then I can move this video link, but okay, so let's have prayer and we'll begin, and then we're gonna watch, this video is an edit of the American Experience program on the Great Depression, or really just the stock market crash and how this came about, and it was devastating. Then we'll move into the next slide, because it is this crash that will cause the depression. And I will just say this briefly, that prior to this, economic downturns, which there were many and came about often at times, were called panics. Because people would panic and grab all their money out of the bank and so forth. And actually, the word depression was used during this crisis by President Hoover, because he thought that would be a word that was psychologically less destructive on the American people, that it wasn't time to panic, the economy was just depressed. And it would bounce back if you just held steady in it. And so that was the idea. So let's have prayer and then we'll begin. Father, your hand is on each of us. We pray that you will guide and direct us and help us as we study together, learn this material, and have your hand on us and prepare us for our test this week, and then prepare us for break as you will direct in each of our lives. Be with the choir as they travel over these weekends, and that your hand would be upon us. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
I have a downside, trying to get off the train before the disaster hits.
Monday, October 21st. Hoover, along with the political and financial leaders of the country, arrives in Dearborn, Michigan to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Edison's invention of the light bulb. The host is Henry Ford. The country is reminded that in 50 short years, men like Ford, Durant, and Edison had transformed America from a third-rate power into the industrial giant of the world. And while they celebrated, their world was beginning to fall apart.
October 23rd, when the market was a little shaky, weak. Whether it's caused some spread of pessimism, one doesn't know. It certainly led a lot of people to think they should get out. And so on Thursday, October the 24th, the first Black Thursday, the market, beginning in the morning, took a terrific tumble.
The market opened in an absolutely free fall, and some people couldn't even get any bids for their shares, and it was wild panic. And an ugly crowd gathered outside the stock exchange, and it was described as making weird and threatening noises. It was indeed one of the worst days that had ever been seen down there.
There was a thunderbolt on Black Thursday. Directly across from the New York Stock Exchange was a low, stately building, the House of Morgan. 22 years earlier, J. Pierpont Morgan had stopped the panic of 1907. October 24th, high noon. All eyes were now on acting head Thomas W. Lamont.
John Lamont called
a number of the other bankers, like Charles Mitchell of the National City Bank, and people from the Bankers Trust, and the J. Hopper Wigan of the Chase Bank, and so forth. There were about a half a dozen of them there, and they were gathered together to really discuss what they could do to stem this tremendous onslaught of selling stocks on the stock exchange that was taking place.
About 12:30, there was an announcement that this group of bankers would make available a very substantial sum to ease the credit stringency and support the market. And right after that, Dick Whitney made his famous walk across the floor of the New York Stock Exchange.
Richard Whitney, vice president of the exchange, was chosen by the bankers to be their representative. At 1:30 in the afternoon, at the height of the panic, he strolled across the floor and in a loud, clear voice ordered 10,000 shares of US Steel at a price considerably higher than the last bid. He then went from post to post, shouting buy orders for key stocks.
Stood up on one of the seats at the post. And he said, I give 45 for 50,000 standing aisle. And everybody started to applaud. The crash is open. His mortgage put his money in, and the crash is open.
And sure enough, there seemed to be evidence of the bankers that moved in to end the panic. And they did end it for that day. The market stabilized and even went up.
The New York Times said that thanks to the formation of this bankers pool, most observers felt that the panic and the great sell-off was over. And most people did feel that way. Tom Lamont felt that way.
But Monday was not good. Apparently people had thought about things over the weekend, over Sunday, and decided maybe they might be safer to get out. And then the real crash, which was on Tuesday, the market went down, 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 seeming limit.
October 29th. Morgan's bankers could no longer stand the tide. It was like trying to stop Niagara Falls. Everyone wanted to sell. AT&T down 50%. RCA wants $110 a share, couldn't find buyers at 26. Blue Ridge 100 plunged to $3 and still no buyers. On the floor, they had never seen anything like it.
Just like a nightmare. And I couldn't believe what was going on. In those days, every buy order was on a black pad, and every sell order was on a red pad. And all I saw was members running around with a fistful of red orders, just like chickens with their head cut off. They didn't know which way to run. They were panicking, screaming. Everybody was walking into everybody else. Don't remind them. Anyhow, this is what happened, and I tell you, and I was supposed to answer everybody yelling at me. I said, what am I supposed to do? I mean, nobody knew what the hell.
William Durant, the bull of the bulls, now tried single-handedly to support the market. The further it plunged, the more of his millions he poured into it.
He became truly convinced that he was omnipotent. He thought that nothing would really unseat him. It was unfortunate. Forces were too great. There was no one man that could have been so powerful to control the market.
There were some people, however, whose investment strategies made money. On October 29th, Jesse Livermore's wife, hearing of the crash, ordered the servants to move all the furniture out of their mansion into a small cottage on the estate.
So when Mr. Livermore got home that night, and he walked into a totally vacant house. When she told him that she had effected the move because she was sure that they had lost all their money, he told her that he had made more money that day than he had ever made before.
For most others, it was all over. in brokers' offices across the country. The small investors, the tailors, the grocers, the secretaries, stared at the moving ticker in numbed silence. Hope of an easy retirement, the new home, their children's education, everything was gone.
My father was, ready to kill himself. In the morning of the crash, he got a call, and it was Max Gordon, and Max Gordon said, Groucho. My father said, what? And Gordon said, Groucho, the jig is up.
There were all sorts of rumors, and you see people going down the street looking up to see if they can catch somebody jumping out the window. Now, it turned out there weren't as many people jumped out the window as they reported, but some did, and others committed suicide other ways.
500 miles from Wall Street in the Atlantic, a luxury liner, the Berengario, was heading home. Franklin brokerage office word spread through the ship. The bottom's fallen out of the market. Running out of the Turkish baths and towels. Card games ended abruptly. Everyone tried to jam to the tiny office yelling, sell that market. They had left England wealthy men. They docked in New York without a penny.
Nothing unique about this. It is something which happens every 20 or 30 years, because that is about the length of the financial memory. It's about the length of time that it requires for a new set of suckers, if you will, a new set of people capable of wonderful self-delusion to come in and imagine that they have a new and wonderful fix on the future.
In the 1930s, Charles Mitchell was hounded by Senate committees and the IRS. The crash had left him $12 million in debt.
This house was taken over, of course, and things changed. And I began to know what the
Now, the man who had made money during the stock market, why was that, you might ask? Why was he making money? One thing you can do in a stock market is what is called sell short. And when you do that, you bet that the market will go down, and you make money based on how far the market goes down instead of going up. And that's what he did on that day. So in other words, he was expecting that the market would go down. Some have suggested that because he and a few other of the very rich titans had done that, that they had orchestrated the loss to help them make money. I don't think that's true. But what is true is that they were very perceptive of what the market was going to do, and they expected it to go down. They weren't exactly expecting it to go that far down when it did. Okay. Now, the Great Depression. The Great Depression is caused by the stock market crash because of the loss of all of the financial reservoir. And then the New Deal that Roosevelt will implement will be a way of trying to solve the Great Depression. Now, when we're looking at this, how the stock market crash caused the depression. Brokers demanded full payment for stocks bought on margin. Remember, when you buy stocks on margin, you're using what? Borrowed money. And so many people, as much as 90% of what they owed was borrowed. But when the stock price goes down, then the bank wants their money back. And in order to accomplish that, some of them had to sell more stock to get the money they needed, in order to pay back the bank, and that made the stock price go down even more. And you keep cascading that until there were bigger and bigger margin calls and more people needed stock. So investors withdrew savings from bank to pay off their stock prices. But as you may know, that money isn't in the bank. It's loaned out to people, and most of it, to buy stock. So the banks ran out of money, and that caused banks to close. Banks needed money to cover speculation. The banks and investment companies began to collapse. Just like in It's a Wonderful Life, when the banks, there's a run on the banks, and the Bailey Savings and Loan is able to survive with $2 left at the end of the rush. The international economic troubles. American loaned billions to Europeans. Highly protective tariffs limited European sales in the United States during the 1920s. This meant that the Europeans had a difficult time selling their products in America. And so now with the stock market, this creates a worldwide panic, because the Europeans were not able to repay their loans to the American banks. Germany depended on American loans as part of the Dawes Plan to make reparation payments. And allied nations depended on German war reparation payments to pay their war debt. So what was happening is, after World War I, the United States, through the Dawes Plan, gave money to Germany to help them pay their reparation payments to the Europeans. And then the Europeans could pay their debts to American banks. With the stock market crash, the supply of money dried up in America. We couldn't pay the Germans to pay the Allies to pay us. And that created a worldwide depression as a secondary consequence of the war. And this will allow the depression to go around the world, and Hitler and others, Mussolini and so forth, will rise in Europe as a result of the total devastation of the world economy in the 1930s, late 1920s and early 1930s. Now, here we see Hoover struggles with the deepening depression. Now, Hoover was a very good man when it came to disaster relief, and you would have thought he would have been great at this. But as president, he really believed that the government needed to stay out of these types of things and not intervene unnecessarily. Hoover considered his considered response to a worsening collapse all around him. He feared that massive federal spending for work relief would create a permanent underclass of people dependent on the federal government, and he didn't want that. And so he was hoping that the economy would just work itself out on its own. Hoover wished to encourage social interventions by private charities. Now, there were shanty towns that were set up all around where people who were homeless otherwise and their families could live in vacant lots in towns. In some cases, this might be known as shanty towns, but they named them after Hoover. They called them Hoovervilles. When the president's name is attached to something that is this bad, you know things are bad. That they were, the shanty towns were called Hoovervilles. The unemployed drifters were called Hoover bags. And various other things were named after Hoover. And as a result, the Republicans did lose the midterm elections in 1930. Now, Hoover saw that he must saw that he must balance the federal budget, but proposed a national sales tax that Congress, but instead Congress gave him a graduated income tax, proposed the Reconstruction Finance Corporation to provide businesses and loans in order to help them through this crisis. But probably the most important thing that he did that was seen as an issue, and this was another very public thing, was that there was the bonus army. Now, the bonus army were veterans that came to Washington to ask for bonuses. Now, these were men that were promised a bonus for serving in World War I, and that bonus was not to be paid until the 1940s, but they wanted it paid early. And Hoover was against paying it early because it would cause the government to go into a deficit. Now, we can't even imagine that today because we spend like trillions of dollars more than we take in every year. So he was worried about a couple 100,000, maybe a couple million at the most, that he would be spending in deficit. But anyway, they came to Washington and they protested. They were setting up shanty towns right on the National Mall. As a result, he eventually ordered that they be evicted once Congress voted not to pay them early, because at that time, even though the Congress was controlled by Democrats, they also agreed with Hoover that the budget had to be balanced. General MacArthur, who will become famous during World War II, enthusiastically expelled the bonus army. In fact, he put on his best uniform as chairman of the Joint Chiefs to actually assist in this process and force them to evacuate. They burned the shanties down. There was one death of an infant, of one of the family members, but it's amazing to me that there weren't more casualties during this. And although this needed to be done, it was not something that was well received by the American people, because they watched this happen on television and Hoover got the blame. Even though it was, in his mind, I don't think he wanted it to be done as publicly and as violently as it was. That was MacArthur. Now, the election of 32. The election of 32, as you can see, is almost a complete Republican rout. Democrats won everything except for a few states in the Northeast. Hoover received 92 electoral votes and 15.7 million votes. He was nominated in Chicago by an unenthusiastic convention who expected that he would lose. Campaign platform: spending cuts, a balanced budget, participation in a world conference to stabilize currencies. Democratic candidate Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was in a wheelchair but no one knew it. By this time, he has learned how to walk with crutches and braces on his legs, but no one actually knew that he was in a wheelchair. Major candidates are House Speaker John Nance Garner of Oklahoma, Alpha Bill Murray. Franklin D. Roosevelt was nominated on the 4th ballot after making a deal with Gardner to become vice president. Franklin D. Roosevelt flew to Chicago to accept the nomination in person, the first time that had happened. Before this, whoever was nominated at the convention would be later on informed of their being nominated at a special ceremony sometime later. But Roosevelt flies to Chicago from New York in an airplane, which were very unreliable back then. He also did it as a deal with Pan Am to let it be known that it's safe to fly. You're not likely to crash. And when he got to Chicago, he then came to the convention the very night of the nomination and announced that he would accept it in person. He gave a speech where he promised a new deal to all Americans, campaign platform spending cuts, a balanced budget, a participation in the World Conference to stabilize currency. Oh, by the way, that's exactly what Hoover was doing. So they're the same. He also pledged to expand relief programs and repeal prohibition. He was a very dynamic candidate, though, opposed to Hoover that was sort of boring. He would receive 22.8 million votes and 472 electoral votes. Socialist candidate Norman Thomas received 882,000 votes. Communist William Foster, 103,000 votes. After the election, when Hoover loses, there's an interregnum. After that, the 4 months until he's inaugurated. Back then, inaugurations were in March, not January. What is the date today? Is it the 4th? Today would be inauguration day. March 4th, that was originally inauguration day. So after the election in November, they would normally wait until today to inaugurate the president. So that's a much longer period than today. Today is January 20th. 4 months between the election and inauguration, a time of significant economic decline in the country. I mean, if things were bad at election day, they were much worse by the time Roosevelt became president in March. Roosevelt refused to make comments to support sound economic measures and stabilize the internal currencies, even though Hoover wanted them to work together to try and create a more stable economy by the time Roosevelt took office, but he wouldn't help him at all. He wanted anything that went bad in the intervening period, he wanted that pinned on Hoover 100%, so that he could then take over. Now here is Roosevelt the man. I've been to his house in Hyde Park, New York, and I recommend that you could go. That's the very first home, and then next to it is the his presidential library, the very first presidential library for any president. He was the only child of his parents. He's from Hyde Park, New York. He married his 5th cousin, Eleanor. Her maiden name was Roosevelt before she married him. She is the niece of Teddy Roosevelt. Her father was TR's brother. So you have to go back several generations. It's a 5th cousin. So it's pretty far removed in the relative thing. So it's just that she didn't have to change her last name when she got married because she was already a Roosevelt. She got married at the White House. TR gave her away. And I will say this, that Franklin Roosevelt's mother thought that she knew everything about him. And after he was born, she threw her life into raising him and managing him and everything. And he kept his love interest with Eleanor a secret from her until they were ready to get engaged. She was devastated. Although she did build them a house that was in Washington, in New York City, that had another house for her next to it with a sliding door that wouldn't lock, that she could go onto any floor of their 3-story house at will. And that was their wedding present. She also would tell the kids that she was their real mother. Eleanor only bore them. I hope that meant that she didn't make them feel, unhappy because she said unfunny things all the time. She was boring them. But she really didn't like Eleanor at all and treated her horribly. Now, political career. He's first elected to the state as a state senator in 1910, that's the state of New York. And he serves there briefly, but very distinctively by leading a rebellion of Democratic senators in order to prevent the election of a US senator. Then in 1913, he was appointed Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and he served there until 1920. His goal was to follow in the trajectory of TR. TR was a state senator, then he was Secretary of the Treasury, Assistant Secretary of the Navy. Then he was nominated for Vice President in 1920. He will lose. He's then elected Governor of New York, 1928, and in 1930, he is re-elected. Then in 32, he will become the presidential candidate. He's stricken with polio while attending a Boy Scout jamboree where polio was running rampant through the campground, and was unable to walk. Next time I go to Maine, I want to go to Campobello Island, which is the easternmost point, right off the easternmost point of Maine. It's actually in Canada, but it's the only National Historic Site that is outside of the United States. It is the Roosevelt compound where he was stricken with polio and was never able to walk again. He felt funny in his legs. He told his wife he was going up to bed to rest. He never walked again. By the time he awoke, his legs were too weak and he could not walk. He was the first president to master speaking on the radio and gave what became known as fireside chats during the Depression. And Americans would listen to the radio and the president explaining what was happening, and they would do so next to the fireplace. Roosevelt was seen as a very poor administrator. He really didn't like to manage the government. He liked campaigning and drinking alcohol and playing poker with his friends. And many times he would hope that problems would just go away. His closest advisors were social worker Henry Hopkins and his wife Eleanor Roosevelt, who he found invaluable. She was his eyes and ears. He couldn't go around and inspect things because he was in his wheelchair and he didn't want anyone to know that he was in a wheelchair. But she would go and do on-site inspections of all kinds of things and report back to him, and traveled extensively on his behalf. Now, the first New Deal. The first New Deal was from 1933 to 1934 and was the initial period where presidents are judged on what they get accomplished in their first 100 days, and that's because of Roosevelt. Before that, no one cared what you did in your first 100 days. The first 100 days called Congress into special session, declared a bank holiday, and restored public confidence in the banks. President granted extraordinary powers in attacking the economy, as in the same way as he would have if we were invaded by a foreign foe. Employed bold experimentation. He believed that not every plan that he would have would succeed. Some would fail, and if they failed, fine, we'll try something else. He was open to new ideas, nurtured an interest group democracy in which the government arbitrated clashes between classes, regions, and various minority groups. Roosevelt begins new programs, and there's a whole lot of them. The Emergency Banking Relief Act imported Roosevelt to close the banks and gave discretionary powers to trade in gold and silver. The Federal Trade Commission curtailed the irresponsible trading on the stock market, and the new securities needed to be registered with the Federal Trade Commission. And the first director of the Federal Trade Commission to regulate the stock market was Joseph Kennedy. Anyone know who that is? It would be the father of John Kennedy, who was president. He was known as a great speculator. It was like putting a fox in charge of the hen house there at the, but he was great because he was so good at cheating at the stock market during the do whatever you want to days, that he really knew what corruption needed to be rooted out. A move toward a balanced budget. Federal workers' salaries were capped at 15%. Slashed veterans' benefits, reorganized government agencies, eliminated jobs where necessary, distinguished between emergency and temporary spending, but tried to balance the general budget as much as possible. This will not work in the second New Deal, but he did work at that in the first. Then you had the Glass-Steagall Act, which established the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, that FDIC, if you go to the bank, you'll see that they have a sign that your deposits are insured up to $250,000. It used to, originally it was only 100,000, maybe even less than that. But now if you have more than $250,000, then you have to figure out how to manage that so that you don't have, you have it in multiple accounts in multiple banks in order to ensure that it's all insured properly. Then empowered the Federal Reserve System to curb speculation by the banks. And then currency manipulation took the nation off the gold standard and doomed the London Economic Conference to failure, which was designed to try and stabilize the currencies of all the world currencies by using gold as a standard. But the United States said, we aren't going to participate. Then relief agencies. The Federal Emergency Relief Administration gave direct relief to the unemployed and began what we may know now as the American welfare system. But you know, one of the things they found is that most of the unemployed would not take free money for doing nothing. So people refused to accept money without doing any work. So that's why this program was developed, the Public Works Administration, and things like the Civilian Conservation Corps. This provided jobs for unemployed to build national infrastructure. Many of the national parks in the 1930s were developed, and during this period. If you want to see a good example of a WPA work project, go out here to the Van Cleve, to the Solid Rock Assembly of God Church, because that building that is now a church, I don't know what it was originally, but that's a WPA building. The original building up on the hill that was the radio station, I don't think the building that's there now, but the building that was the original transmitter building was a WPA building that was built for some purpose like that. This used a national planning board to coordinate long-range plannings. And so people would be hired to do work, building roads, building buildings, making trails at the national parks, all kinds of things. Most of these people would have qualified for direct payments as unemployed people for doing nothing under the previous plan, but they wouldn't take the money. So now they got the same money they would have gotten, but now they're getting paid, and we're getting work done at the same time. Another is the Civilian Works Administration that employed 4.2 million persons in hastily conceived projects, undermined the church as the primary relief agency, in America. This is where things like the Writers' Project and all kinds of other things of that nature began, in which people could be paid to make guidebooks. I should have brought one. If you go into the library, there's a guidebook to Breathitt County. It's blue on the shelf. We have some from other places that was produced during this period. And on the Waltons, there is a individual who comes to Walton's Mountain, who is working on a WPA, Works Progress Administration, which is a different organization. There's PWA, but the WPA, which is the Works Progress Administration, that administered some of these things under the Civilian Works Administration. Anyway, he is researching the history of Walton's Mountain in that area of Virginia, and he's staying with the Baldwin sisters, and he finds out that the Baldwin lady's father was arrested for treason because he had assisted Union soldiers during the end of the war, and the war ended and he was never found guilty, but causes quite a stir in the Waltons to find that out. Now, the Civilian Conservation Corps authorized the employment of 250,000 young men between the ages of 18 and 25 to work in conservation, in national forests and parks, in military-style accommodations. Received $30 per month, some of which was sent home to their parents. Now, this program, although it is not in existence anymore, there are similar type programs that the federal government will pay you to go and do work in the summer. And then another important thing is the Tennessee Valley Authority, which was a source of unemployment relief and broad experiment in regional planning, a series of dams to control floods and provide cheap electrical power in the South. Basically, beginning on the Tennessee River, that's why it was called the Tennessee Valley Authority, but also here in Eastern Kentucky, Eastern Tennessee, in Alabama, in Georgia, the Carolinas, and areas of the country that had very little infrastructure and power and problems with flooding. As you may know, we have problems with flooding around here. Not like we used to, but flooding nonetheless. And the Tennessee Valley Authority helped to control that and produce cheap electricity for these areas that needed it. It also encouraged economic development in the southern states. Also, we have another thing about the New Deal. The Farm Credit Association refinanced farm mortgages on long-term low interest rates. The Bankruptcy Act made it easier to reclaim lost property and make it more difficult for a farmer to be declared bankrupt and have his property taken by creditors. The Agricultural Adjustment Administration attempted to redress historic imbalance by raising farm prices. It made food more expensive, but it also helped farmers in getting more for their crops. So the federal government did two things. They would pay people at times to grow crops, or more, they would pay the government would buy crops at above the fair market value, then resell it, losing money. Or they actually paid farmers not to grow crops or to destroy crops. Destroy milk that had been milked. Destroy crops that were in the ground, plow them under. And they would pay them more than what they would have made if they would have sold it at market to reduce the amount of food available. Do you know what that would do to the food price? If you reduce the amount of food, what do you think it would do? Make it go up, because there's one thing about farmers. Every year you want to grow more than you did last year.
is something farmers have in them that they wanna keep growing more food. But if you keep doing that, eventually, if people don't keep eating more food, it makes your product worth less over time. So that's one of the things they wanted to avoid. Agriculture Adjustment Act, domestic allotment plan granted subsidies to farmers to return for growing less commodities. A quarter of the nation's farm production was destroyed for 1933, and many farmers were sharecroppers and driven from the land because they weren't needed anymore in order to pick crops they weren't planting, or by mechanization and reduction of production. And they migrated on Route 66 from Chicago through Missouri, Oklahoma, all the way to California. And these are the Arkies and the Okies that are on their way west on Route 66, you know, the mother road, where road goes through Radiator Springs and such, on their way west. This is when the Southwest, such as Arizona, New Mexico, and even Southern California, begins to become more populated. Now, this is the next big thing. The National Recovery Administration, the NRA, not the National Rifle Association, this is a different NRA, the National Recovery Administration. And this was a plan that was designed to basically coordinate production, means of production, and the ability of Americans to achieve the getting the economy organized. There were floats. There you have Miss NRA, and there's the Statue of Liberty standing next to her in parades. Every company that was compliant would have an NRA sticker. We do our part in that restaurant to comply with wage and price controls. It was a coordinated business, labor, and government to facilitate the recovery. It greeted with patriotic fervor, but became a bureaucratic albatross around the neck of the Roosevelt administration, and many people believed that it was un-American, almost communistic, opposed by many Democrats, including Al Smith of New York, as well as Republicans. It encouraged national change to dominate the American economy at the expense of small mom and pop or regional businesses. It worked on the assumption that overproduction caused the depression. Now, there is some truth to that. But in 1935, the US Supreme Court declared it partly unconstitutional, and the entire NRA ceased to exist after that, when it became unwieldy to implement in a way that was compliant with the Constitution. In the end, the New Deal will do one other thing that is very important, and that is support labor unions for the first time. Section 7A of the National Industries Recovery Act gave unions the right to organize and bargain collectively. And the United Mine Workers were the first union to take advantage of this law. And although Roosevelt hated strikes because he thought that they were bad for the recovery, he did support them in their striking. And the completing of the New Deal saw the Homeowners Loan Corporation stop home foreclosures, and the Federal Housing Administration insure loans for new home repairs that the federal government would supply. And when we come back, we're going to stop, we're going to end prohibition. These people are here in this bar waiting until the clock strikes midnight on the night, and so that, you know, right after midnight, the amendment goes away and they can drink again. See, they're all ready, they're ready to go. They've been waiting 13 years to do this.
Thank you, Dr.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.